Hi guys, in this video I'll be going over navigation for the Hornet. The Hornet has different things for navigation. It has the backup compass, radio navigation, TACAN, and Waypoint navigation. First I'll go over the backup compass. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's just a regular compass. You probably never need to use this in DCS, but at least you know it's there. Before I go over the other navigation methods, I want to do a quick overview of the HSI. If you go to one of your screens and press the menu button until you get to the support menu, and then you press HSI or horizontal situation indicator, you get this display here which kind of looks like a compass. This is what you use for navigation in the Hornet. All the navigation systems are integrated into the HSI page. So before I explain the different navigation systems like radio nav, TACAN, and waypoints, I want to just go over some of the basic functions of the HSI. First of all, the Hornet has these two screens on the left and right which are colorless displays, and the center one is a color display. So if you bring up the HSI on a left or right screen, it'll look like this, but if you bring it up on the color display, you'll see a map in the background. The problem with this map is that it's really bright and hard to see things, so if you want you can turn the gain down with this switch here. But even with the gain turned down, sometimes it's still kind of hard to see the words. So if you want to use the HSI in the middle display but you don't want the map in the background, you can press the mode button here and you can deselect the box that says map and it will get rid of the map in the background. If you have map selected but you can't see it, that's because you can't see it on some scale levels. I can see it right now, but if I zoom out to 160 miles, I can't see the map anymore. And if I click the scale button, I can go to 80 miles. And then once I go to 40 miles, then the map shows up. If you click the mode button, besides the map, you can adjust other settings. If you press T up, that stands for track up, and that's the normal HSI mode. The top of the HSI will be where my plane is pointing. And if I turn my plane, you can see the compass here will turn. The other mode you can do is north up, and if you do that, then north on the compass will be at the top no matter what direction your plane is pointing. The other mode you have here is decentered. If you press this, it puts your plane on the bottom so you can see more of what's ahead of you. If you want to get out of decentered mode, then you can just go back to track up or north up. The last setting here in the mode section is the slew button, but right now it doesn't do anything. I'm not sure if they're going to add a slew function later, but I'm assuming not because the manual says it's not implemented. Also, the compass on the HSI uses magnetic heading, but if you press data and then press AC to go to aircraft settings. If you want, you can press this to switch it to true heading, but I would just leave it to magnetic. And you can press HSI here to go back to your main display. Now let's go over what you can actually see on the HSI. These numbers here in the circle are obviously a compass. This straight line on top shows what direction you're flying. As you can see right now I'm flying about 120 degrees. The cross in the middle is obviously your airplane, and to the right and left of your airplane you can see your speed. Your true speed is on the left and your ground speed is on the right. You might see this little rectangle here, that's called the heading bug. If you use this switch right here, you can move the heading bug across the screen. This is just a really basic navigation tool. If you're not going to be using anything like radio nav or TACAN or waypoints, then you can just set the heading bug to what direction you want to fly, and then you turn to put your lubber line here through your heading bug. Also, if you hold down the heading switch, then you should see H cell here, which is heading select, and you can type in, like let's say I want my heading bug to be at 50 degrees, I just type 50 and click enter, and it moves it to 50 degrees here. If you want to set it back to the default north position, you can just type 0 degrees and it'll put it back to north. The other thing you can do is the course selection, which is with this switch here. It works exactly the same as the heading bug, but you need to have a navigation source selected, which is either waypoint or TACAN. Now, of course, I will go into more detail into waypoints and TACAN later, but just as an example now, if I select waypoint, then after selecting it, I can set the course line. And it works exactly the same as the heading bug. You can set, 50 degrees here and like that. If you want to turn off the course line, you have to just deselect whatever you had selected and then reselect it and it will be off. Also, if you have a course selected, it will show up on your HUD. As you can see on my HUD, there's a course arrow to the right of my velocity vector, which means that I need to turn the plane right to be on the correct course. And what I want to do is turn right, and I want to fly until the course line intersects through my velocity vector. So I'm going to turn the plane right, and as you can see I'm flying towards the course line, and as I do that, the course line is going to go towards my velocity vector. Once it's almost through the vector, I'm going to turn back toward my waypoint. And now that the course line is going through my velocity vector, you can see I'm flying toward the waypoint on the correct course. Those were the basic functions of the HSI. Now let's go into the different navigation methods. The first one is the radio navigation, which is where you literally use your radio to navigate. The Hornet has two radios. They're both the exact same radio, and if you want to learn more about them, I have a different video on just the radios themselves. But what you do is use this switch here to select which radio you want to use for navigation. Now in the Hornet, the radios work in the megahertz range, so we need to find a beacon in the megahertz range to navigate to. And in DCS, when you're using radio navigation, most of the time you're going to be flying to a VOR beacon. The VOR beacons are these little hexagons on the map. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a little hexagon right there. And if you zoom in, you can see this is at 113.6 megahertz. Now what we need to do is tune our frequency in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select radio 1, and I'm going to use my scroll wheel to go to the M, which is for manual frequency. And I'm going to type in my frequency, which is 113600, and click enter. And when you dial in the frequency, you should be able to hear some Morse code. Since we hear the Morse code, we know we're dialed into a radio beacon. So what we need to do is select radio 1 for navigation. So I'm going to flip this switch up to radio 1. And once you do that, you should see a circle on the outside of your HSI, and that will point towards your radio beacon. So I'm going to turn the plane towards that circle now. And now I should be heading towards the direction of the radio beacon. And as you can see on the map, I'm pretty much heading towards it right here. A couple notes about radio navigation. First of all, if the Morse code gets annoying, you can turn the volume down, but don't turn it all the way down because that will turn off the radio. The other thing you need to know is that if you don't want to use the radio for navigation anymore, then obviously you set this switch to off. But once you change your channel to something else, you need to make sure to turn the squelch back on by clicking this button here. The reason why is because when you use a radio for navigation, it automatically turns off the squelch, which will cause you to hear a slight staticky noise. So if you're not using it for navigation anymore, then make sure you press the squelch button to turn it back on. That was radio navigation. Now let's go over TACAN Navigation. TACAN Navigation allows you to tune into TACAN stations, which are these little triangles on the map. First thing you need to do is turn the TACAN on by pressing this button and just holding the on button for a second, and you should see it say on here. Then we need to find a TACAN beacon. So you can either look for these little triangles on the map, or you can just click on the airports and they'll tell you if they have one. For example, this airport has a TACAN, but if I go to something like Maycop, you can see Maycop does not have a TACAN. So when you press on the airport, it will tell you the channel and the band. The channel is just a number and the band can be either X or Y. So if you press the TACAN button, first I'm going to type in the channel number 44, and then make sure you have the correct band selected. And then you can do the TACAN mode. There's three modes. Transmit receive will give you range and direction. Receive will give you direction only. And then there's also air-to-air mode. I'd recommend always using transmit receive so you can get the range. Once you have that dialed in, your HSI should find the TACAN station, and it will show up as a little triangle here. And you should also see this triangle here that will point to the direction of it. You'll also see the data block for the TACAN, which shows up on the left. It shows the angle 45 degrees and 25.7 nautical miles away. It shows the time to reach it, which is 4 minutes and 50 seconds. And it shows the name of the TACAN station, which is KTS. And if I press here, you can see the TACAN is KTS. So it says 25.7 nautical miles away. So let's go ahead and test that. My ruler says 25.9, so that is pretty accurate. You can also select the TACAN button right here. If you do that, on your heads-up display, it'll show you the range to the TACAN station, and there will also be a little rectangle here. And all you have to do is turn the plane to put the little caret over the rectangle, and that will take you to the TACAN station. That was radio navigation and TACAN, and now let's go over Waypoint Navigation. The first thing to explain are the two different modes. The navigation system in the Hornet is controlled with this switch here. The CV and ground position are used for aligning the navigation system, and I go over that in my startup video. But the two main modes are Nav and IFA. Nav is the basic navigation position, IFA is in-flight alignment. In DCS, most of the time you're going to leave it in IFA, but in some missions you'll have it set to Nav. Basically, if you have it set to Nav, it will just use the navigation system in the plane, but if you have it set to IFA, it will use GPS at the same time. So basically, if you have it set to IFA, it will still be using the navigation system in your plane, but it will also be using GPS at the same time to update your navigation system and make sure it's as accurate as possible. So if you're flying in a DCS mission that has GPS GPS available, you always have it set to IFA. But if your DCS mission does not have GPS available, then you want to fly with it in nav. If you want to check if you have GPS in your mission, press escape on your keyboard and go to the briefing, and you can see the mission date. If your mission takes place during or after 1986, then it will have GPS. If it takes place before 1986, there will be no GPS. As you can see, the mission I'm in takes place during 2016, so I definitely have GPS. In this case, I'm going to leave it in IFA. And in DCS, 99% of the time, it's going to be in IFA. Just another quick note about GPS. There's actually one other thing you need to have GPS in your mission besides just the date. You need to make sure that USA is on your team. If you click this button, you can see all the teams in the mission, and whatever team you're on, you need USA to be on that team for GPS to work. So if you click USA, you can switch it between red team and blue team. Your plane itself does not need to be assigned to USA. If I click my Hornet here, you can see my Hornet is assigned to Combined Joint Task Force Blue. You just need to have USA on your team. The only way to get around that is if you go to Customize Mission Options, and if you click Enforce here and check Unrestricted SatNav. In that case, everybody in the mission will have GPS regardless of whether or not USA is on their team. Now, if you have GPS available in your mission, then when you have the switch set to IFA, you should see Position A-INS up here. If it just says INS, that means you don't have GPS available. Now, I actually recorded this part after I edited the video. In the rest of the video, you're going to notice for me it just says INS here. And that's because when I originally recorded it, I actually forgot to add USA onto my team. But now you know the two conditions you need to have GPS, which are that your mission has to be during or after 1986, and you need to either have USA on your team or enable unrestricted SatNav in the mission. Now that I've gone over the difference between nav and IFA modes, let's go over Waypoint Navigation. First, I'll go over how to add a waypoint. You need to click the data button here and make sure waypoint is selected. And then you can use these arrows here to select the waypoint you want. I can edit any of these waypoints, or I can add a new one. If I want to add a new one, I just go to any waypoint that is zeroed out like this. And then I need to find some coordinates. So let's say I want to put a waypoint over this little target runway right here. You hold left alt on your keyboard and left click, and it will drop a little blue circle, and you can see these coordinates here. So the coordinate format the Hornet uses is degrees and decimal minutes. In the little menu here, DCS calls it lat-long decimal minutes. So what I'm going to do is click UFC and click position, and let's type in the first one. So the first one is north, and then I'm going to type in 415053. And click enter. For the second one, I'll do east 414788, click enter. Then I'll do the elevation, and you can do feet or meters. I'm going to do 33 feet, and you can see now the waypoint information is filled out. If you want to overwrite a waypoint, like let's say I want to overwrite waypoint 2, it's exactly the same. You just select it, click UFC, and then you can type stuff in here to overwrite it. That was how to add a waypoint. If you want to navigate to it, you use these arrows to go to the waypoint you have selected. If you have a waypoint selected and there's no data block, it means that that waypoint doesn't have any information. But once I go to waypoint 6, you can see the data block appear on the right, and a waypoint will show up on your display as a little circle. And you can also see this triangle here that points to the direction of the waypoint. You can see right now the waypoint is a bearing of 167. It's 17.2 nautical miles away, and it'll take 3 minutes and 26 seconds to get there. Also, if you want information to show up on your heads-up display, just like with the TACAN, we can press waypoint here. And just like with TACAN, it'll show the distance here and also the rectangle pointing to the direction of the waypoint. You can also insert a waypoint with the grid method. Let's say I want to make a waypoint right here on the runway. You can see one of the coordinate formats we have is MGRS grid. If you want to make a waypoint with grid coordinates, what you do is you do the same thing. I'll just go to waypoint 7, press UFC, and I'm going to click grid here. And then you need to have your slew controller binded. If you want to use buttons, it's the throttle designator controller keybinds. And you can also use axes if you want to. And you also need to have the throttle designator controller depress button binded. So as you can see, for the grid coordinate, we have these two letters here, GG. So what you need to do is you need to use your throttle designator controller to slew over to the correct letters. If you can't see the letters here, then what you can do is you can scroll over to one of these things here and press TDC depress, and that will kind of move the boxes. You can also just press it with the buttons here. So for me, I need to go to GG, which coincidentally is right where my airplane is. And I'm gonna put it over, and you need to press TDC depress, and then it should underline it. And you just need to wait a couple seconds. Then you should see grid selected here, and you need to type in 6 numbers, 3 from this first block and 3 from the second block. So I'm gonna do 3, 2, 4, and then 3, 5, 4, and click enter. And that's how you do grid coordinates. Now if I go to waypoint 7, you see it's 167 degrees and 16.8 miles away. And let's just verify that. I'm gonna use the ruler. 168 degrees, 16.8 miles away, pretty accurate. There's no difference between grid coordinates and regular coordinates. They're exactly the same. It's just you input them into the plane differently. I prefer to use the regular lat-long coordinates, but some people like to use grid coordinates more. One of the features of the Hornet is the sequence mode. If you press sequence here and box it, you can see some lines connecting your waypoints. If you deselect it, it will go away. And also, as you select and deselect, you can see sequence 2 and then sequence 3. Keep in mind, in DCS, only sequence 1 is filled out by default, but you can fill out sequence 2 and 3 yourself, and I'll show you how to do that later. And if I go to my waypoints, you can see here's waypoint 0, here's waypoint 1 on this corner, waypoint 2. As you can see, it just connects all my waypoints. But you might notice something odd. When I have sequence selected, I can only select waypoint 1, 2, and 3. I can't select any of the other waypoints I made, like waypoint 6 and 7. And if I deselect sequence and I go up to waypoint 6, if I reselect sequence, you can see waypoint 6 is not part of my sequence for some reason. This is because even though we created waypoint 6 and it is an actual waypoint, if you click data here and click waypoint here, you can see it's not part of my sequence. It's not part of, basically kind of like my flight plan. So what you need to do is you need to insert your waypoint here. What you do is you press the waypoint sequence button and you click insert, and I'm going to do waypoint 6 and click enter. And you can see waypoint 6 was added into my sequence. Now when I go back to the HSI, you can see waypoint 6 is part of my flight plan now. You can also add a waypoint between other waypoints. For example, let's say I want to add waypoint 7 in between waypoint 2 and 3. I click waypoint sequence, click insert, and I'm going to type the first waypoint I want. I'm going to do waypoint 2 and click enter. And now whatever I type in is going to show up after waypoint 2. So now I'm going to type waypoint 7, click enter, and you can see now waypoint 7 was added in between waypoint 2 and 3. And now with my sequence selected, you can see it goes waypoint 1, 2, 7, 3, and 6. If you want to remove something from your sequence, all you do is press delete, and I'm going to delete waypoint 7, so I'm going to type 7 and click enter, and now waypoint 7 was removed. Now keep in mind, if you delete a waypoint, it doesn't actually delete the information saved in the waypoint. If I deselect sequence and go up to waypoint 7, you can see it didn't delete waypoint 7. It still has all the coordinate information and everything. And you can see I can still fly to waypoint 7. All it did was remove waypoint 7 from my sequence. The last thing to go over with sequences is sequence 2 and 3. When you make a mission, it fills out sequence 1 by default, but if you go to sequence 2 or 3, you can fill them out yourself. For example, in sequence 2, I can go ahead and add waypoint 1, waypoint 2, and you can see it fills it out. That was the basic waypoint functionality. Now let's go over offset points. Let's say I know where a target is, but I don't have the actual coordinates of the target. All I know is the target's position relative to a waypoint. For example, let's say I have a waypoint right in the middle of the cross and the target's right here. But let's say I don't have the actual coordinates of the target. I just know the direction and distance of the target from the waypoint. In that case, you can use a waypoint offset. If I go to data and waypoint, you can see here's my waypoint 6, and waypoint 6 was in the middle of that cross runway target. Here you can see the offset information. Let's go ahead and add an offset. I'm going to click UFC and click offset here. Here is my starting waypoint number 6. What I'm going to do is put my ruler on my waypoint. Make sure you have the ruler selected with this button here. And waypoint 6 was right in the middle here, so I'm going to right click on it. And then I'm going to find my target, and let's say my target is this right here, so I'm going to right click. And I'm going to get the distance first, and as you can see, it's 1.77 nautical miles. So I'm going to click UFC, offset, range, and you can choose feet, meters, nautical miles, or yards. I'm going to do nautical miles, and mine was 1.77, so I'm just going to round it to 2 and click enter. Now I need to set the bearing, so I'm going to click UFC, offset, bearing, and you can do true or magnetic. In DCS, remember the blue number here is the magnetic and the black one is true. I'm just going to do magnetic bearing 126. So do magnetic 126, and then you just type zeros, click enter, and you can do the elevation too. I'm going to hover my mouse over it, and on the top left you can see the elevation is 98 feet, so I'm going to type 98. And you can see here's my offset point. Now when I go to the HSI, when I'm going through my waypoints, when I go to waypoint 6, you can see it says OAP, and that is basically telling me this waypoint also has an offset. And when you look at your HSI, the circle will be the waypoint, and the cross will be the offset for that waypoint. Now you cannot navigate to the offset point. If you press OAP here, it will still take you to the waypoints, as you can see waypoint 6. It's just that you can see the offset point on the display. However, you can designate the offset point as a target if you want. If you press waypoint designate, by default, it will designate the waypoint as a target, and you can see it with the diamond right here. But if you press offset, it will designate your offset as a target instead. And you can see there's my offset point as the diamond. If you want to undesignate a target, you just deselect the target button. That was offset waypoints. Now let's go over time on target. Time on target is if you want to reach your waypoint at a certain time. If you press data and go to waypoints, you can see time on target right here. What you need to do is have one of your waypoints selected as your target. Now something important here, the time on target system is not the same thing as the targets I went over earlier. If you press waypoint designate on one of your waypoints and get the diamond, that diamond is an air-to-ground target, and that is completely different from the time on target system. It's not related to it at all. So this target is not the same thing. What time on target is it's basically one of your waypoints in your sequence you can select and say, I want to get to that waypoint at a certain time. So first I'm going to select a waypoint. I'm just going to say waypoint 3. I'm going to click waypoint sequence, click target, and click 3 and enter. And you can see now waypoint 3 is boxed as my target point. Then what you can do is press TOT, and you can enter the Zulu time you want to reach that waypoint. If you want to know the Zulu time, you press the aircraft button, and you can see the Zulu time. Right now it's 11:16. So let's say I want to get there at 11:20. I'm going to type 11:20:00. You type hours, minutes, and seconds, and click enter. And it's saying now I want to be at waypoint 3 at 11:20 Zulu time. Also on your heads-up display, you can see the Zulu time on the bottom left. Now, when you do that, you'll see a little line below your speed, and you can see a caret. If your caret's on the left, it means you're going too slow and you're not going to get there in time. If it's on the right, it means you're going too fast and you're going to get there too early. Right now, I'm heading towards the waypoint, and when I increase my speed, you can see the arrow is moving towards the bar. Also, if you want, you can set a ground speed. For example, if I do waypoint sequence, ground speed, and let's just say 400 knots. This sets the speed from your initial point to your time on target point. Your initial point is the one right before your TOT point. So for example, number 2 would be my initial point. So this is saying that from waypoint 2 to waypoint 3, I want to be going at 400 knots. And that will adjust the time on target system. If you want to remove time on target, all you have to do is press target again and then press the selected waypoint and click enter. And you can see it unboxes it. For some reason, it doesn't remove the symbology from the HUD. I'm not sure why, maybe it's just a bug or something. Last thing I'll go over for waypoints is automatic mode. By default, once you reach a waypoint, it will not select the next one. You have to select it yourself here. But if you want it to automatically select the next waypoint, you need to click the auto button. The auto button is right here. And the way that auto mode works is that once I reach a certain waypoint, it will automatically select the next one for me. If you click auto and you notice your sequence doesn't show up, you might have the wrong sequence selected. For example, here I'm on sequence 2. Make sure you keep clicking the sequence button to get back to sequence 1. The last thing to go over with the waypoint system is the mark points. You can create a mark point by pressing the mark point button up here, and you can have up to 9 mark points. By default, when you press it, it'll drop a mark point on your current position. And when you cycle through your waypoints, after you get to the last waypoint, it'll go to your mark point. A quick way to do that is to go to waypoint 0 and then click down, and then you'll enter your mark points. So let me go to mark point 1, and you can see mark point 1 is 0 miles away because I'm in active pause right now and I dropped it right on top of me. Also, if you are in air-to-ground master mode like this, if you have anything designated as an air-to-ground target, then when you press the mark point button, it will create a mark point on your designation. For example, if I designate a target right there, 10 miles away, now when I press the mark point button, if I go to mark point 2, you can see 10 miles away. That was Waypoint Navigation in the Hornet. For the rest of the video, I'll just be going over some extra features. Now keep in mind, there are some features that I noticed the manual says do not work. However, when I looked at them myself, it seems like they do actually work, at least somewhat. So there are going to be some things that I don't know or I'm not sure exactly how they work because the manual has not been completely updated yet. The first thing to go over is position source. If you press the position INS here, this is basically the way your aircraft gets its position or knows where it is. First is INS. This is inertial navigation system, which is basically the navigation system built into your plane. Then there's TACAN. The way that this works is that you need to be connected to a TACAN station. If you're connected to a TACAN station and getting, the bearing and range to it, the airplane has a database of positions of TACAN stations. And basically, knowing your range and angle from the station and knowing the coordinates of the station, it can kind of guess the coordinates of your plane. ADC is a backup navigation mode. It's a simple navigation mode that you're supposed to use, in case your main navigation system breaks. GPS will just use GPS alone. It will not use your navigation system at all. In DCS, I would just always leave it in INS. Now, some of you might be thinking, isn't GPS more accurate? Well, the thing is that the way the INS one works is that it actually uses INS and GPS at the same time. Even though it just says INS here, in the manual it said that if you have it set to INS mode, it will use the INS in your plane, but it will also use GPS to update your navigation system and keep it accurate. Just a quick note, I already mentioned this earlier in the video, but just in case I'll mention it again. If you have GPS available in your mission, it's supposed to say position AINS right here. The reason mine says position INS is because when I recorded this video, I had my Hornet set to Combined Joint Task Forces Blue Team. However, unfortunately, I forgot to add USA onto Blue Team, and in the mission, you have to have USA added into your team in order to use GPS, or you have to enable unrestricted sat-nav in the mission settings. Now, I have heard some things in the past about how apparently if you set it to GPS, it can make bombing more accurate or something like that. I'm not sure, I never tried it myself, and also it was a couple years ago and I think it was related to some kind of bug or something. So you could try that, but honestly in DCS, I would just leave it in the default INS position, and you can see here it says position INS. I honestly think these other modes are meant more as kind of backups. I mean, the ADC mode is definitely meant as a backup, but honestly I think the TACAN mode is really meant more as a backup too. So you can try these other modes if you want, but you really shouldn't have to mess with this. I would just always leave it in the default INS position. By the way, if you want to see that database of TACAN stations, you click data and press TACAN, and you can scroll through and it shows you the channels and also the coordinates. So if you do want to use TACAN as a position source, you have to be actually, connected and tracking the TACAN station, and that TACAN station has to be in the database of the plane. But once again, I don't think there's really any reason to do that in DCS. I would just always leave it in the default INS position. The next thing is this button that says vector. If you press it, you can choose link 4 or link 16. Now, in the manual, it said the vector button doesn't do anything, and if you press it and do link 4, nothing happens. But I noticed that if you press it and select link 16, it actually boxes the vector. Since you can box it, I'm assuming it will do something in the future, but in the manual it said not implemented, so I'm assuming it just doesn't do anything right now. Next is the ACL button. This is related to the automatic carrier landing system, which will be for a different video. Next, I'll go over these buttons on the bottom here. On the bottom, you should see it say sensors, time UFC, and also auto. If you don't see these, if you see something else that says land and sea, that means you don't have GPS available in your mission, and you're going to have to set this to nav in order to see the correct options down here. First, we'll go over the sensors button. In the manual, it says that later they're going to add the ability so that when you click it, you can see radar contacts on your UFC, but right now it doesn't do anything. The auto button is something I already mentioned earlier in the video, and the time UFC button will bring up these options on your upfront controller. By default, it shows Zulu time on your UFC, but you can press this here and it will show the local time instead. You can also press CD for countdown, and you can see it starts at 6 minutes, and if I click enter, it'll start counting down, and I can click enter again to pause it. And if you do ET, that will be elapsed time. If you press ET and hold enter for a second, it'll start counting up. You can press it again to pause it, and then press it again to resume. And if you press set, then you can set the date. Now I'll talk about doing navigation fixes. In older planes that didn't have GPS, it was really important to do navigation fixes because as you flew on long missions, the navigation system in the jet would become misaligned over time and you'd have to realign it. However, the Hornet has GPS built in, which automatically updates the navigation system for you, so most of the time you don't need to do an INS navigation fix. As you can see, if you have your plane set to IFA, and if you have GPS available in your mission, which I do because it says AINS here, then in that case, the update button will not even be available because you don't need it. However, if you do not have GPS in your mission, or if you set it to nav mode, then you can see the update button, which will allow you to do an INS fix. Now in the manual, it said the update button didn't work. However, I noticed that some of the functions actually did work. If you press the update button, you can see there's these different types of updates you can do. The ones I was able to get to do something were TACAN, Designate, and GPS. You can press the auto and map buttons, but I couldn't figure out what they do or how you're supposed to use them. And if you press the velocity button, nothing happens, so I'm assuming the velocity button just doesn't do anything right now. As I mentioned earlier, the ones I was able to get to work were TACAN, Designate, and GPS. I was able to figure out how to use the TACAN and the GPS updates, however, I couldn't figure out how to use the DSG update. I couldn't find anything about it in the manual, so I'm not sure how to use it. So first, let's go on to the TACAN update. In order to do this, you need to be connected to a TACAN station, which I showed you earlier. You just press the TACAN button, turn it on, and dial in the station. And then your TACAN also needs to be in the TACAN database. If I click cancel and go to data and TACAN, you need to go through these and make sure your TACAN is somewhere in this database. And the way the TACAN update works is that if you press TACAN and click accept, then based on the coordinates of the TACAN and based on your range and angle from it, it can determine the coordinates of your plane. And because of that, it can update and fix your navigation system. Next, we'll go on to Designate. This definitely does something. When I did the Designate update, I was able to get it to move my navigation system, but I couldn't figure out exactly how you're supposed to use it. Every time I would mess with it, I would just mess up something and I had to refix it with the TACAN update. So you can try the Designate update, but I'm really not sure how you're supposed to use it. The other update method that works is the GPS update. However, obviously this only works if you have GPS. If your plane is misaligned, all you do is you press GPS update and press accept. However, keep in mind, it doesn't really make sense to use the GPS update because if you have GPS available in your mission, then in that case, you should just be using IFA anyways. That way the GPS will be constantly updating your navigation system. If you don't have GPS in your mission, the GPS update is not going to work anyways. The only time I can see you using GPS update is if you have GPS in your mission, but for some reason you don't want to be using it, you're just in regular nav mode. In that case, if you go on long flights and your navigation system becomes misaligned, you can just go ahead and do a GPS update. However, if GPS is available in your mission, you might as well just be using IFA mode anyways. Those were all the extra functions on this main page, but now I'll click the data page and go over any extra stuff in here I didn't cover. If you go to the aircraft, you can adjust some settings for your aircraft. Nav check button doesn't do anything. I already talked about the heading for magnetic or true. I would just leave it to magnetic. The lat long decimal button will change the coordinate format. By default, it's on lat long decimal, which means you have degrees and then you have minutes with 2 places after the decimal point. If you press this, it will change it to degrees, minutes, and seconds. I always just leave it on the default degree minutes because that's what the Hornet uses. You can also do TAWS. I think TAWS was like terrain awareness system or something like that. I think what it's supposed to do is give you some kind of warnings when you fly near terrain or something like that, but honestly, I couldn't figure out how it works. I've tried turning it on and off and I couldn't find it making any difference, so I'm really not sure how this works or if it's modeled at all, but it's on by default, so I would just leave it on. Then you have the warning altitude. Here you have barometric and also radar. Barometric, it will give you a altitude warning based on your barometric altimeter, which is this right here, and radar will give you a warning based on your radar altimeter, which is this right here. So if you want, you can adjust it, and let's just say I'll change it to 4,000 feet. Now keep in mind the radar altitude warning here is not the same thing as the warning here. On your actual radar altimeter, you can set a warning level, for example, 200 feet, and that will give you a warning, which will be 2 beeps that play. This warning here is not the same as this warning here. If I set a radar altitude warning here of 500 feet, I'll have 2 separate warnings, one at 500 feet and one at 200 feet here. Next, there's this norm button. I'm not sure what this does. The GPS button, I'm not sure what this does either. I'm assuming these just don't do anything. Then there's the TAC mode. This is related to the autopilot, which will be for a different video, but when you're using the autopilot, you can use it to fly to different waypoints, and if you set it to nav blim, it limits the autopilot to doing a 30-degree bank angle, and if you set it to TAC, it lets it go to, I think, a 60-degree bank angle. And if you click UFC, you can enter wind speed, direction, magnetic variation, and stuff like that, but I don't think you really need to mess with any of that. Now let's look at the waypoint page. Once again, I already talked about slew earlier. I think it just doesn't do anything. GPS button here, once again, that doesn't do anything. If you select air-to-air waypoint, you can see there's a 0 next to it. That will set a waypoint as a bullseye. The bullseye is a waypoint in your plane that is a reference point. Missions always have bullseyes built in. For example, in this mission, you can see the bullseye for blue team is right here. So this is just for if you want to set a waypoint in your plane to be the bullseye reference. For example, I could go to waypoint 1 and now set waypoint 1 as the bullseye. I already went over the sequence button. There's this button here that says datum 47. I don't think this does anything. The precise button here will activate precise coordinates. So by default, you can see I have degrees and then I have minutes with 2 points after the decimal place. But if I click precise, then I can type up to 4 points after the decimal place. If I go back to aircraft and switch it to degrees, minutes, seconds and do precise, now you can see I have 2 points after the decimal place for seconds. Also, this increases the amount of digits you can do for grid coordinates. You can see normally the grid coordinates only allow 6 digits, but if you do precise, you can do 10 digits. If you're just making a regular waypoint to navigate to, obviously you don't really need precise coordinates. But if you're going to use a waypoint to drop a JDAM or a GPS bomb or something like that, then obviously you definitely want to use precise coordinates. Then there's the overfly button. Once again, this is related to the autopilot. What the overfly does is if you have it selected in your autopilot mode, it'll fly the plane right over the waypoint and then it'll start going to the next one. If you have it deselected, then it'll fly kind of like a curve. It won't go right over your selected waypoint. It'll curve kind of to the next waypoint. I already went over the sequence button. I'm not sure what reference waypoint does. I couldn't find anything about it in the manual. And nav check doesn't do anything. Then there's the TACAN menu. This is the TACAN database I've showed you earlier. Once again, we have these GPS and nav check buttons that don't do anything, but there will be 10 TACAN stations filled into the database. Now, keep in mind, you do not need to use the TACAN database if you're just doing regular TACAN navigation. The only time you need the TACAN database is if you're doing like a nav fix, or if you're using the TACAN as your position source here. And if you press the UFC button, then you can change information in the database. MD data right now doesn't do anything. I'm not sure if they're going to add it later. And those were all the options for the data page. That was navigation for the Hornet. Thanks for checking out this video, and I'll see you later.